Mashallah, tabarakallah. Okay, so I thought, well, the kids are on spring break, all the schools are out, and so I figured I could do some more lives because who knows the next time I'll be able to. And so I thought we could dig into some Friedrich Nietzsche, thus spoke Zarathustra. My sinuses are a bit irritated, so if you see me, like, take a pause to wipe under my nose, that's why. California gets really arid this time of year, and I do better in a snow climate, to be quite honest with you. And, my nose just doesn't like this dry weather. Okay, so we were in a section called Conversation with the Kings. So this should be quite good. Let's begin now. I can see him a bit. Let's see if I disconnect from the Wi-Fi. That'll help. If, uh, let's see if it buffers. Let's begin. Zarathustra in his mountains. Procession. On the very path follow down, two kings were approaching, adorned crowns and crimson belts, colorful as flamingos. Now, colorful as flamingos, if you look at how the Aztecs would adorn themselves with lots of feathers, you can begin to kind of see, like, there's a point there, isn't there? Still look a little glitchy. So, even in some classical English paintings of their kings, quite flamboyant. So when Nietzsche points out a flamboyant angle here, he's not far off, okay? Peacocking. Even though flamingos don't peacock, they still stand out, don't they? The way that they will balance on one leg and just stand there while they're in their bright colors. And they were driving a laden ass before them. So he means a donkey, right? What do these kings want in my realm? Zarathustra said in his heart. Surprised, and quickly he hid behind a bush. But when the kings came close, he said half aloud, as if talking to himself, Strange, strange. How does this fit together? Two kings I see, and only one ass. So he's making a joke there, right? So there's two kings and then a donkey, and donkeys are often called an ass. But he's making the joke of, like, it should be all asses. Get it? So he's kind of mocking the kings. The two kings stopped, smiled, looked in the direction from which the voice had come, and then looked at each other. Something of the sort may have occurred to one of us too, said the king at the right, but one does not say it. The king at the left, however, shrugged his shoulders and replied, It may well be a goatherd, or a hermit who has lived too long among rocks and trees. So, a hermit, right? Now, not too long ago, I've mentioned oftentimes about when you're a hermit and you're not, because I kind of see myself as kind of a hermit in a way. You don't desocialize, but you kind of just get used to your own company, and you're less likely to play the emotional mirror of the person you're talking to. So what do I mean by that? In California, there's a lot of liberals. LinkedIn, pardon me, LinkedIn liberals. And when you go to talk to them, eye contact, nodding, smiling, showing your teeth, right? And then you follow their mood, their movements. Andy in the office made a joke about that. And it's like a facade mask that you put on. Assalamu alaikum, Haruki. And when you become more of a hermit, you're not really up to that type of challenge. You feel like you can be who you are. Not that you're going to be rude all the time, but that you're able to sort of live without that filter, that corporate, polished, fake filter. Think of like the American politician. They kind of always have to be this fake person. You don't really know who they are, right? And so when the king's like, hey, who would talk to us like that? Who would make this type of rude comment? They assume it's a goat herder or hermit. And that just plays to a classical stereotype of the straightforward animal raiser, right? So you're a cattle rancher, you're a goat herder, you're around animals, so you're not as pompous and flowery. You're not as willing to go along with the charade. And so Nietzsche, when he puts that in here, has a good point for us. For no society at all also spoils good manners. Good manners? The other king retorted angrily and bitterly. Then what is it that we are trying to get away from? Is it not good manners? Our good society? It is indeed better to live among hermits and goatherds than among our gilded, false, painted mob. Yeah, see, so we were on the right vein here. So notice here. So, for example, in the Hardy Boys books, there was one, the Secret of Skull Mountain I was reading to the children. And in the story, there was a hermit. There was two hermits, a male and a female. And they were kind of just more on, like, they were uncouth in a little bit, right? They're not gonna be fake complimentary, okay? And a goat herder, someone who has spent time with animals, you have a lot of patience, but you're also like, hey, stop that, don't do this, hey, I need to go tie this fence up. You gotta get the job done. In the corporate world, it's more of a dance, Sometimes you'll see memes that people will make where, oh, I want to look like I'm working, but I'm really not working. I'm rearranging something on my laptop, right? Some folders, and giving the impression that I'm working when I'm not. But when you work with animals, the proof that you're working is right there, right? And so, in the office versus in the field raising animals, it requires a different mindset, a different ethos, a different type of set of manners. Now, we're not saying that hermits and cattlemen and goat herders and all that are just rude, saucy people, but you're often going to get more truth from them because they seem to be more connected to the real world and less lost in the fog of pompery. And so Nietzsche gives us this example when he says gilded. So gilded, bright, shiny, polished. False, obviously, when someone's super fake. Painted mob, so it's polished, right? Even if they call themselves good society, even they call themselves nobility, they are false and foul through and through, beginning with the blood thanks to bad old diseases and worse quacks. Best and dearest to me today is a healthy peasant, coarse, cunning, stubborn, and enduring. So notice here, he's really done a service to the common man. Just the other day, a woman called me a pleb. She called me a plebeian. She called me a peasant. And you'll see this comment where people will say things like that, and they see themselves as an aristocrat, someone who is above it all, who really sees themselves as someone in the hierarchy, and you beneath them. Now, think of, if you ever seen the cartoon The Emperor's New Groove, Cusco and Pacha, I think his name was. Now, Cusco, it's a funny classic kids cartoon that I like a lot. But it has, like, the emperor, he gets kicked out of his palace, and he was a spoiled, rotten, egotistical, selfish emperor. He gets turned into a llama by his evil female advisor, Yzma, and he's taken care of and helped by the peasant Pacha, and he becomes like, hey, maybe the common people aren't so bad, right? And you can see how when a ruler looks down on the common man, the common person, right? They become really unpleasant, out of touch, and tyrannical. But when they have a respect for the common person, that shows they have a different kind of heart here, right? So what has he mentioned so far in the book? Hermits, goat herders, a healthy peasant, stuff like that. Assalamu alaikum, amplifier. That is the noblest species today. Assalamu alaikum, Peter. Doing well, how are you? The peasant is the best type today. So here we see that the peasant is the most noble, whereas the nobles are not. And the peasant type should be master. Now that's a bold statement, right? If you're an aristocrat, you're a CEO, and you're hearing that a goat herder should be put master, well then you see the ego step in and they get very mad, right? But it is the realm of the mob. I shall not be deceived anymore. Mob, however, means hodgepodge. Mob, hodgepodge. There, everything is mixed up in every way. Saint and scamp and junker and Jew and every kind of beast of Noah's Ark. Ooh, snap, Nietzsche getting saucy toward the J's. Good manners. Everything among us is false and foul. Nobody knows how to revere any longer. Okay, so revere. Reveration? We are trying to get away from precisely that. They are saccharine, obtrusive curs. They gild palm leaves. Now, what's interesting, when you look at Shakespeare and you look at Nietzsche, they create some of the most niche, get it? Niche, Nietzsche? They create some of the most niche insults. I'm telling you. What's unique about them is that they really expand your vocabulary without you even realizing it. Pardon me. My sinuses are acting a little bit up today, so pardon me if I have to wipe my nose, because this arid weather is just, man, I gotta get back to the snow climate, I'm telling you. I've been saying that for years. Can't afford to move yet, but I gotta get out of this arid weather of California. This nausea suffocates me. We kings ourselves have become false, overhung, and disguised with ancient yellowed feathers, grandfather's pomp. So, remember I just talked about, how you can look through art history and see how kings adorn themselves. How this special guy stands out. Okay? Now he says overhung, so dragging. When something looks overhung, it's not fitted. Now think of somebody who they got a nice tailored fitted suit and they're the boss, versus somebody who has a suit that's oversized and it just looks like it's hanging off their body. Right? When he's using this word overhung and pomp, it's like, yeah, you got the memorabilia, you have the paraphernalia, you have the objects of adornment upon you, but you don't fit in it, and it don't fit on you, and it doesn't match, right? It's like having a leader like Kim Jong-un who's too fat for his clothes. It don't look right. Okay? It don't look, you don't have any drip. You don't have any swag. Let's put it in some common terms, right? There's no aura. There's no, like, pizzazz. There's so many different synonyms you can use to describe that, but that's what Nietzsche is getting at here. Now, disguised with ancient yellowed grandfather's pomp. Think of in Harry Potter, Ronald Weasley. Remember when he doesn't have clothes to go to the ball? And he has to wear these old clothes that don't match with the modern clothes? And he looks quite weird? So you can imagine that's kind of what Nietzsche is getting at. Like your clothes, they're ancient, but they don't fit into the now, right? They're not designed in a way that transverses time. When I was watching King Charles's coronation, King Charles of England, that stuff just looks it don't there's just it looks stale. It looked faded. It doesn't hit hard anymore. When you watch the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, his mom, that stuff you're like, okay, it kind of looks all right, for that time period. When you see Princess Diana's wedding, you're like, that's okay, right? You see how Prince Harry got what he was wearing on his wedding day. Now, a wedding is different than a coronation, but the whole circus of the coronation, there's just somebody's got to update the clothes. They look like something out of a Halloween store, you know? And so when you hear this line about disguised with ancient yellow grandfather's pomp, you can think of that. You can think of real world examples and fictional examples. Showpieces for the most stupid and clever and anyone who haggles for power today. So, showpieces. Haggling for power. We are not the first, and yet must represent them. It is this deception that has come to disgust and nauseate us. So, disgusted by deception and nauseated by deception. Now, what has he mentioned previously, right? He said that, the nobles, they're false, they're a painted mob, they're gilded, okay? The nobility are not really nothing. But the peasants are more healthy. Yeah, they may be more coarse, cunning, and stubborn, but they're enduring, and that the peasant should be the master, and they're the best, noblest species of today. So, the whole part, remember, he also called the kings colorful as flamingos. Now, when a man wears pink, I think it's disgusting. But there are some men who will wear pink. And I'm like, what are you doing? So it's funny that Nietzsche uses a pink bird to describe this sort of, it's like a feminine insult, right? If you look at King Louis of France, his paintings, Louis the 14th, I forget, the one who did Versailles, they were wearing tights, high heels, their hair was like frizzy, they got so many jewels. You look at English men, like in the past, they had these weird clothes, man. And you're just like, what are you doing? It's like their robes drag on the ground, they're made of velvet and silk and shiny. And you're like, ugh, it's just so flamboyant. It's like today when you see a gay man going on the red carpet of a gala, you're like, yeah, it makes sense they would dress like that. And you look in the past, these are supposed to be the leaders of men and warriors, and they're dressed like a gay Hollywood actor. And you're like, what? I mean, it's very strange. And then you look at different representations of kings and caliphs and leaders, chiefs, you got it, you name it. They have a different way of depicting their warrior kings, their leaders, right? But you just look at England and some of these other countries and you're like, it's so flamboyant. And so there's a lot here that Nietzsche is getting at. We have tried to get away from the rabble, all these scream throats and scribbling bluebottles, the shopkeeper's stench, the ambitious wriggling, the foul breath, few for living among the rabble, few for representing the first among the rabble. Nausea, nausea, nausea. What do we kings matter now? Ooh, there's a movement in the UK called like Abolish the Monarchy. So Nietzsche was a little bit ahead of his time, right? The age of the monarchs is gone. You don't really need it. And if you look at, for example, like King Charles, it's funny. The prime minister will get a lot of the blame for the problems of England. But then you have a Christian king, but he's just like an ornament, an ancient ornament of in a dollhouse. The royals are kind of like in an ancient dollhouse. You know, it's just outdated. You know, I get the English; they want to go back to their traditions, but you had a queen female leader for a long time, Elizabeth, and what did she really do to improve your country? I don't get it. It's very strange, right? Your old illness is upon you. The king and at the left said at this point, nausea. Slum spider. Nausea is seizing you, my poor brother, but you know that somebody is listening to us. Immediately, Zarathustra, who had opened his ears and eyes wide at this talk, rose from his hiding place, walked towards the kings, and began. Assalamu alaikum, Shug. Time for you to arrive, the Milan royal family, corduroy thrones and robes made of lamb's wool. Gotta keep it green. Gotta keep it green. Right? We're gonna get some wolf pelts. We're gonna get some coyote pelts. We're gonna roll up in there looking like, we're from Winterfell. You know what I'm saying? That would be funny. And began, he who is listening to you, he who likes to listen to you, O kings, is called Zarathustra. I am Zarathustra, who once said, what do kings matter now? Forgive me, I was delighted. When you said to each other, what do we kings matter now? Here, however, is my realm and my dominion. What might you be seeking in my realm? But perhaps you found on your way what I am looking for, the higher man. So the higher man. Okay, now you see what Nietzsche has done here. He was talking about, first, he took the nobles, who we traditionally see as the high ones, right? They're on the totem pole of the hierarchy, socially speaking. And then he insulted them, brought them down to earth, elevated the hermit, the goat herder, and the common peasant, who traditionally the nobles would have looked down upon. And he said the peasant should be the master. Now Zarathustra is telling these two kings, perhaps you're looking for what I'm looking for, the higher man. Which is a funny thing to tell a king, because the king is like, well, you found him. I must be the higher man you're looking for. Right? You gotta remember, kings back in the day could easily take your tongue for what you've said, throw you in the stockade. They could do whatever they wanted. Pretty much. And to talk truth to power to a king is risky, just like you're saying that to a dictator or something is also risky. But Nietzsche is having a clever play here. Because see, his work adds up. He stays consistent with his theme throughout his written rhetoric, and I can appreciate that about him. When the kings heard this, they beat their breasts and said as with one voice, we have found out. With the sword of this word you cut through our hearts. Thickest darkness you have discovered our distress, for behold, we are on our way to find the higher man, the man who is higher than we. Though we are kings, to him we are leading this ass, for the highest man shall also be the highest lord on earth. Man's fate knows no harsher misfortune than when those who have power on earth are not also the first men. Ooh, okay, see, here we go. Well, that line is bars right there, okay? So, harsher misfortune. Well, okay, so then, who have power on earth are not also the first men. So these kings are like, you've cut deep into our breasts. So it's like our heart, right? With your words cut like a knife. Right? And we're looking for someone higher than us. See, this is really interesting. You have The pyramid symbol, it's so symbolic. And when you're at the top, you're the leader, there's no one above you. But if you don't have that spiritual connection, I'd argue, we look to the prophets, we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even though you maybe have given some temporary authority, you don't think that you're the end all be all. There is wisdom in the peasants, there is wisdom in the common person. Okay? And so, the first men, I often picture that as the wise people, the elders. They're simple people. They don't want to have a Bugatti. They're not on private jets having caviar with a big titty bimbo. They are wholesome, salt of the earth people, right? And so when a king is looking for an advisor, that they don't feel like they are the sort of spiritual guide for their people, their nation, you name it. Well, then they're on a quest. They're sort of on a journey to find out, who can advise me that I can trust to elevate my soul. And you can see why religious monarchs were so valued by the people, because they could feel like, hey, at least, they're being guided by God, right? If you had an atheistic king who thinks himself God or has the ego of a god, right? Then you'd be like, huh? Like Pharaoh, think about him. He's so in power, iron-fisted, ham-fisted, and he thinks he's a god. And how did he treat his people? Something to think about. But Pharaoh had a bunch of his advisors were a bunch of magicians, soothsayers, sorcerers. If you go back and you read At-Tabari, some of his histories, he shows how so many rulers, they had soothsayers, astrologers, and other guys to advise them on celestial, spiritual things. So when Islam comes around and it's saying, no, don't worship the stars, don't worship these trees, and don't look for these weird omens and birds and goat bones and all that, Look to Allah. Shug says, advice to current rulers, gotta step down, homie, just step down the best way. ¿Entiendes, Mendes, o no comprendes? That's funny. Yeah. Okay. That makes everything false and crooked and monstrous. And when they are even the last, and more beast than man, then the price of the mob rises and rises, and eventually the virtue of the mob even says, behold, I alone am virtue. So this is very potent right here. Okay? Remember, he said, these kings are looking for the first men. And now you're thinking, hey, I thought the king was the first guy. What are you talking about? But now, Nietzsche's subtly saying that the king can actually be the last man. So the people you put first, their behavior should be put last. And they are more bestial than men. And the mob, the people, they rise and rise and rise. And eventually they look at their leader and they're like, well, if that's virtue, well, then obviously I'm better than the king because I don't behave like that monstrosity. I'm not that horrific, so I must have the virtue. Okay, think about this now. People will look at the clergy. Let's pick on the Catholic Church for a minute. They'll look at the clergy of the Catholic Church and their scandals, and they'll say, these are supposed to be the spiritual first men of society, but they keep breaking the rules and doing crimes against little boys. You know what? I'm not going to follow them. I'm going to make up my own religion. And then they do that. I've seen this happen with quite a lot of Christians. They get demoralized when their spiritual leaders fail. And not just fail, okay? Like if a priest had relations with an adult lady, you'd be like, well, you're not supposed to, but celibacy is quite a very hard thing on a hetero man, right? And, But then when you see priests, doing bad things with other males, you're like, wait a minute, you're breaking the rules, my guy. That's rule 101. You know what? Maybe you are not the guide for spiritual virtue, so I'm going to go and do this. Right? And then you can see why in Islam, we Muslims have, yes, it's a funny thing to say, but it's called the haram police. But some Muslims will say, don't judge me. But you're like, no, 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 we have to hold the line. Otherwise, we'll become like the clergy of the Catholic Church. And once people see so much corruption, morally, of their spiritual leaders, they leave the religion overall. Okay? That's why, for example, think about it. The Catholics, they tell their spiritual men and women, the nuns and the priests, you can't have romance or intimacy. And clearly that's like the hardest thing ever. I mean, my God, that's hard, okay? You're telling me she can't get married and have kids in order to be a nun? This is crazy, okay? Whereas in Islam, it's no, you could be a spiritual woman or a spiritual man and have a family. You can be an imam, have 4 wives, have 5 kids, each wife, bada bing, bada boom, you're fertile, this is awesome, no problem. And the sheikh, the imam, the scholar is not tempted by the harlot. The harlot who serves shaitan, she has way more risk, power, effect upon a man like a Catholic priest who has to literally fight against his biological urges every single day until he dies, right? And so if you look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given mercy to Muslim men, they say, no, 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 no. You're not going to be forced to be monogamous if you don't want to, and stay within the arrangements of marriages and justice. This relieves a lot of the things that get men in trouble. Because when women and men see their spiritual leaders become sexual deviants, they're like, you know what? You guys should be last. I'm alone in virtue. I'm going my own way. And remember, in Islam, every innovation is misguidance. And you can see people today, when a dawah guy messes up, when a sheikh's marriage fails, they somehow get very sad about their faith, right? Oh, so and so lost a debate, so I'm sad now. And then they start to innovate things into the religion to suit their own narrative. Liberal Muslims are like the innovators that Nietzsche is talking about. Okay? Behold, I am virtue. You see that? I've seen this happen with some Christians who get disillusioned with their spiritual leaders. They see their spiritual leaders become sellouts, right? And then they say, no, you can't, how can this be the true religion if you're a sellout to this, or that, right? And so when Nietzsche uses this example, he has a point, doesn't he? What did I just hear, replied Zarathustra. What wisdom in kings! I am delighted, and, verily, even feel the desire to make a rhyme on this, even if it should be a rhyme which is not fit for everybody's ears. So rhyme, you can think of a satirical poem, right? I have long become unaccustomed to any consideration for long ears. Well then, but at this point, it happened that the ass too got in a word, but he said clearly and with evil intent, yeehaw. So he's clever here, right? So remember, the ass means donkey. Yeehaw. That's the, what do they call it? The burring? Oh, I forgot what boring? I forgot. It's the braying. It's braying. When a donkey makes a sound, it's called braying. What's funny is that yeehaw, that sounds a lot like yeehaw, which is the American cowboy call, which is quite funny. But he just made a joke that the donkey got a word in his satirical poem as well. So Nietzsche is very witty. And here's his little poem, which looks good. Once in a year of grace, number 1, I think, the Sibyl said, drunken without any drink. Now everything goes wrong. Oh, woe, decay. The world has never sunk so low. Rome sank to whoredom and became a stew. The Caesars became beasts and God a Jew. I like that last line. You get it? Oh my gosh, that's funny. Oh, DJ's a little saucy, you know? He's a saucy guy right there. Okay, Rome sank to whoredom. Okay, what does he mean by that? Pompeii. You look at Pompeii, was it Mount Volcano Vesuvius? I forget the name of it. Erupted, covered in ash, right? Now, when they excavate those archaeological sites, they are astounded with how much like graphic images these Romans drew on their walls, right? And in their bathhouses, and they realized how many of those areas were brothels. It was like the Las Vegas of its day, the Miami of its day, right? Probably worse, you know? And remember, there was like a film they did of, I read a book on Caligula, and it's pretty well in Hollywood. You know, of course, some things have probably been embezzled by historians, right? But Caligula was known for turning that senatorial, gubernatorial arena, him and Nero, you know, they turned it into a bit of a circus brothel, okay? And Caligula is a pretty crazy guy, you know? And so, as Rome conquers more territories, you know, they got access to all different kinds of women. And if you recall, okay, the senators' wives, so the elites of Rome, they were able to pay money to have relations with the gladiators, okay? And it was thought in their pagan religion that if you drank the sweat of a gladiator before you coupled with your senatorial old man balding husband, you know, like, cause like, those men is getting old, you know, and that you could get, he could have more virility, and that you would conceive a boy, you know, that it's pretty weird stuff. But I love studying ancient Rome. They got some really weird ideas, but he's not joking when he's, you know, he says that, you know, it got very lewd in Rome, okay? And if you look on their ancient pottery, you can see some of their debaucheries captured, right, on the ancient Rome vases. I don't think most museums display them because there's kids that go to the museum, but you could, you know, you get an art history book, you can see, like, why would someone paint that on a vase? You know, but they're very raunchy, the Romans. So Nietzsche's not joking when the mighty Roman Empire, you know, fell apart because of whoredom. Not just because of women, but the males who sold themselves as well, both hetero and homo, right? Because there was plenty of queer, you know, men in the military in Rome, you know, and little boys and stuff like that. But women, the wealthy women, often bought slaves from Africa who were used in public. Like the women would gather and then they would watch the two slaves do their thing, right? You know, it's very raunchy when you actually dig into the Greeks, the Macedonians, and the Romans, what exactly they were up to. And with, of course, that's such a distracting thing. So it's fascinating. Islam tells us, no, keep it within marriage. Keep it within marriage. Okay? And I'm not fully versed in the fiqh of concubinism, but either way, Islam has had a great mercy on men to be like, hey, you're not forced into monogamy, You can have 4 lawful wives. You think about how many men in history they had their wife as a sort of trinket to parade to the people, like, this is my wife. I married her for land. I married her for status and prestige, and so my sons will have a good lineage. But they have the maids, they have the stable girls, the milkmaids. They're going around town. If you look at Zeus, the Greek and Roman Macedonian leader, Apollo, Mars. You can what was that guy's name who made the armor? Hephaestus? I forget. But you look at how their gods behaved. You're just like, hey, wait a minute, you guys are weird. So, a lot of people will criticize Islam because a man can have 4 wives, and then they'll sit there and make excuses for the Romans who did far worse. Now, when he says the Caesars became beasts. Okay, Caracalla. Wrote a paper on him, and it was for an art history class. It was of his bust. That guy, he's pretty rough. And I have a book called by Suetonius, The Lives of the Caesars. And I like reading about stuff like that where the leaders do these, like, I like reading about gulags, and I don't want to be in a gulag, but I just like reading about it. And I'm a bit macabre, but the Caesars, you can see that as Augustus fades. Okay, let me put it this way: when Gaius Julius Caesar is shanked, things change. But if you look before Caesar, Sulla, he was pretty ruthless. Okay, he put out a bounty list of the people he wanted eliminated, and he paid the common man to chase down those of the politicians he didn't like. So if you look at the history of ancient Rome, they were quite brutal. I mean, today we'll watch politicians have a fight in the in the congressional hall, or filibuster, and we're like, wow, that's wild. But if you look at ancient Romans, they're like, get your gladius, we're going to town, boys. And they're just going at it. Lucas Vander says, Napoleon alina prelateria. Napoleon Bonaparte. And Nietzsche's saucy line here. I mean, it's pretty saucy. The Caesars became beasts, a god a Jew. Tell me how you really feel, Nietzsche. You see that? That's anti. Okay, now part 2, okay? Nietzsche has given us a lot to look at here. These rhymes of Zarathustra delighted the kings. But the king at the right said, "O Zarathustra, how well we did go forth to see you, for your enemies showed us your image in the mirror. There you have the mocking grimace of a devil, so that we were afraid of you. But what could we do? Again and again you pierced our ears and our hearts with your maxims." Okay. So, piercing our ears and hearts with your maxims. Now, all throughout this book, the character Zarathustra spits out allegories, symbolisms, metaphors, maxims, you name it, that get you thinking. And that's what's creative about this book, is that it can make your mind think many different things, and it's really like a gymnastic exercise for your thoughts. So we said at last, what difference does it make how he looks? We must hear him who teaches. Now this is a saucy point too. What difference does it make how he looks? I want you to think about the American politician, alright? Let's pick on the American politician some more. If you look in the 1950s, you look back, I would say before the 80s, politicians, just take old Bush Sr., Ronald Reagan. They had to kind of look presidential, right? Look at Gavin Newsom today. He's got the slick back Batman, Gotham villain look, right? People think, Does he look like a president? And then you look at Bernie Sanders. For all his faults, you know, I think Bernie could do a good job actually. Not with everything, but with healthcare for sure and college reform. But I digress. People will say, well, Bernie doesn't look like a presidential guy, but Gavin does. They're talking about the aesthetic. They're talking about the brand, the marketing. You know, does like when you make a movie, they're thinking, okay, does this guy look like he would be a president? Now, also think about, let's say, Phantom of the Opera. He has a mask on half his face because he's scarred, right? And he's an operatic genius. He can write great operas. He was in a freak show as a kid because he was scarred up, and he stays in the bowels of the opera house so people don't look at his face, but they like his plays, his operas, right? Now, he's a genius creating operas, but he hides his face and who he is because he doesn't want to be judged for how he looks. And that people will judge you based on how you look instead of what you're saying. Because humans, yes, we are visual, okay? But it's hard for us because we want to judge a book by its cover, don't we? We see physiognomy and we want to be like, yeah, you look shady. Because we had to do that to survive when you think about it, right? Think about the paradox that we have as humans. Follow over here. You see a beautiful woman, you're like, well, she must be a good person because she's attractive, right? And then she turns into be a total psychopath. You know? She turns to be a total villain. And you're like, what? I didn't see that coming. Like, you know? Or you'll see an old lady who looks like a happy grandma, and she's like a evil lady, right? Okay, so I'll give you an example. Pardon me. Think of Hansel and Gretel. That old story about the candy house. The kids are like, oh, this must be a nice place because this house is made of candy. But that evil lady puts them in the oven and eats them. Okay, so what are we teaching kids? Don't be fooled by looks. Okay? Now, what is the classic Beauty and the Beast that Disney did? At the beginning of that Disney film, there's an old lady who knocks on the door of the prince's castle. And she needs shelter from the rain. And all she has to pay to get in is a rose. The king's like, you're ugly, you're old, get out of here. Slams the door in her face. Suddenly, she turns from that old lady into a beautiful lady. And she's like some witch. And she puts a curse on the prince. I don't know if he's a king or prince. But turns him to a beast. Right? And then the whole legend and folktale continues. So, what do we learn, and even in folktales, is, and in reality, is that it's very hard for us, you know, no matter which way you square it. You see someone beautiful, you want to trust them. You see someone ugly, you don't want to trust them. And you can notice examples of an ugly person being evil, a beautiful person being good. And when you look at true crime stories, for example, like there was a nurse who had eliminated, we'll put it that way, 8 newborns. And when you look at her face, you'd be like, she looks like she would sell milk on the side of the road. Like, she doesn't look like that kind of a person. But I've come to learn, you know, the faces of evil are so camouflaged that it actually can make the world pretty terrifying, because you see how our own eyes can't perceive what's in the chest. So we have to be discerning, cautious, you know, aware. And so when Nietzsche says here, he has the king say, you know, what difference does it make how he looks? We must hear him who teaches. To hear somebody out, not to judge by appearances, but to be like, okay, what you're saying. It's not that the looks don't play a part. It's that you're like, let me just... He may look scary, but is he telling the truth? Right? You know, when you want to do propaganda, They hire like a really pretty lady, right? That's the funniest part. You get a big booby bimbo, dressed lewdly, and some people will just be like, and then if you get a guy and he looks like he could sell perfume in Italy, you know, his fancy pants and leather shoes, leather loafers, and the women are like, oh. You're like, okay, cool, we got him. The bait is there. You gotta have a certain image to sell your propaganda, right? And that's why you have to be so careful these days. We've always had to be that way. But we gotta be like, okay, the balance of looks, how you carry yourself, your actions, versus what you're saying, right? That's the paradox. That's the brilliant paradox. So when Nietzsche inserts these bars here, we can see the genius of it. You shall love peace as a means to new wars. Ooh, did you just hear that? You shall love peace as a means to new wars. Oh, let's go to, like, okay, what did America do? Yeah, we're gonna have peace in Afghanistan. Yeah, let's get out of Afghanistan, everybody. Next, hey, you know what? Let's go to war with Iran. Boom. America is a prime example of that. Oh, yeah. Let's go to war with Japan. Let's go to war with Vietnam. Now today, what is it? Let's go to war with China. They end a war to make peace to begin a new one. Because they can see when the American people have had enough. But the wars never end. A perpetual cycle of death and destruction. See, Nietzsche is hitting it home here. Hitting it home. And the short peace more than the long. Nobody ever spoke such warlike words. What is good? To be brave is good. Is the good war that hallows any cause. Zarathustra. The blood of our fathers stirred in our bodies at such words. It was like the speech of spring to old wine barrels. When the swords ran wild like snakes with red spots. Our fathers grew fond of life. The sun, all peace struck them as languid and lukewarm, and any long peace caused shame. What did he just say? Any long peace caused shame. I want you to think about something. Okay, you look at some countries like England and France. Maybe they got some soldiers doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, right? But you don't see England and France as like tough people anymore, really, right? But if you look at, let's say, you think of Egypt, you think of, let's say, Americans, you see, okay, let's put it this way. Countries that haven't kept engaging in strife, warfare, combat, their bodies are different, their minds are different, right? Whereas Frenchmen, not to be rude, not all, but they're like, let's smoke a cigarette, have a croissant, and drink coffee, and read some newspaper. It's just not, you don't fear them. You see them as posh. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Not that they're sophisticated Barbies, but you just see them as more, they're like a leather bag that has no weathering. It's hard to explain, but I'm trying to explain it the best way. So some Americans will look at that like, okay, the Canadians, like how some Americans look at Canadians. They'll be like, you guys haven't had you're not battle tested. You've had long terms of peace. No, that's shameful. You need to be out there, dicing somebody up, right? And people, this paradox of durations of peace and the human body. As peace continues for a long time, people become softer. But if you stay in a perpetual war cycle, you can't really prosper to the point of medicine and education and population growth because you're so unstable that you can't preserve families. It's very difficult, right? And the disabled, like people who have been maimed, You don't have enough to sustain them, and you drain your treasury. You know, peace allows you to build up your treasury, but your people become softer. When you're at perpetual war, you drain your treasury, the people become hardened, but also many starve. If you're in perpetual peace, your people become fat and gluttonous. So it's like, huh. If you look at how many Americans, the paradox of America is though, is that you have a lot of obese people in America, but you also have a lot of militaristic mindset. This is the enigma of America. You know, the amount of obese people who are cheering the what's happening in Palestine, these people can't even control their own hand and stop eating, Burger King, McDonald's, and KFC, right? But they think they're tough and they're gonna mount up and go and drop bombs in Palestine. It's just crazy to me. You see what I'm saying? It's like it's like a fat king who is telling the skinny slave to hurry up. You know what I mean? It irks you the wrong way. You're like, wait a minute, you're just like some fat slob barking orders, and you're not sweating yourself. You're not doing any of the hard suffering yourself. You're just demanding others do it while you keep stuffing your face like a glutton hog. You see what I'm saying? So, he mentions here these two potent points. You shall love peace as a means to new wars, and any long peace cause shame. I mean, that's a deep line because it's talking about the mindset. Remember, the Romans, the Macedonians, the Greeks, they had the god of war called Mars. When you look at some of the, what do they call that? The Swedes, the Nordics, yeah. You look at their sagas, which are really hard to read, but they also have their tough ethos as well. And so their warriorism. I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong because you have to have men to protect the people, but it's about the duration of it, right? And the placement of it. How our fathers sighed when they saw flashing dried up swords on the wall. What did they say? How our fathers sighed, like, oh, that longing sigh when they saw flashing dried up swords on the wall. Okay, think about in Game of Thrones, Sam Tarly takes Ginny to his home. Their family sword is on the wall, right? Passed down from generation to generation. The sword has become a decoration. Then think about how Tywin Lannister does the Red Wedding. He melts down Ned Stark's Valyrian steel sword into two swords and gives one to Joffrey and one to Jaime to actually use. And his logic was, it was such a big sword, it's absurd. It's like a decoration. It's just I'm gonna melt it down and make it functional, put it to work, put it to use. And so this is an example of, if you're gonna have it, use it, right? Now let me give you another example. You go to someone's house, they got a bunch of antique weapons on the wall, collecting dust. Okay. But you go to someone's house and everything's polished and they've been using it in the backyard, and that's a lot more fun, isn't it? Because you're like, oh yeah, man, we're gonna take that off the wall, let's go. Versus someone who has theirs in a glass case. You see the difference? And so people see it, they want to use it. If you're gonna have it, use it, right? You want to have a tool and put it to work, and how that tool calls to you to be used. A lot of psychological symbolism going on here. Like them, they thirsted for war. Exactly, you see? It's like, it's fascinating. If you had a backyard and you had a tank, and you're like, hey man, do you use that? Can we totally use that tank? And you're like, nah, it doesn't work. Oh. Like, it's cool that you have it, but you can't use it, so it's not as fun. But if someone's talking trash to you, and they're your enemies, and you're like, hey man, I got a functional tank, now you want to use it. You see the psychology there? You know? It's an interesting thing. Very interesting. For a sword wants to drink blood and glistens with desire. What does Tyrion Lannister say? A sword needs a wet sternum. I forget. He had a very clever quote that, what the sword craves. You know? Or the old saying, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right? And when Dany buys, Daenerys Targaryen buys the Unsullied, the masters tell her you should bled them early. You should test them. You should use them on the cities who are ripe for sacking to test them and get them ready. What is this hinting at psychologically? You have an army. You want to put them to use. Right? Right? You got a whole army. You can't just have your army standing around. What do you get an army for? You got an army to put them to work. Very fascinating. Okay, I'll pause here because I just saw a text from my husband. He's coming back from the jog with the children. We're going to run some errands. He told me to get ready. So I got to go put on my Muslim clothes for outdoors. So I got to go. But we did an hour. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. I hope you enjoyed it. Nietzsche is a very saucy, witty figure who can get you thinking. And I like that. You never know what he's going to say next. And that's always enjoyable. He's not a predictable writer. The philosophers of today, I'm just like, you guys suck. You guys aren't fun anymore. You don't say anything meaty, you know? They just memorize Aristotle and Plato. They're not actually philosophers themselves, right? But it's a great book. I like it very much. So I hope you enjoyed. Take care. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and join the blog. And until next time, take care.